Amishji, for doing this. It is like I've been doing this for a while now. I have about 90 episodes out, and I've spoken to very eclectical, very intelligent, very sophisticated, all varieties of people. But this is kind of the first time I'm speaking to a childhood hero of mine. I remember, like, and I mean, I genuinely mean that by all accounts, because I remember I was 14 or 13 or something of that nature, maybe 15, when I read The Immortals of Meluha. And it was the first time that a very massive truth dawned upon me. And I'll tell you how. I understood at that moment that in some sense, stories can be very potent carriers of ideas. Because apart from what was happening to Shiva or whatever was happening around, there was an underlying sociological, almost like economical, political analyses kind of a situation happening, where we were seeing these two different kingdoms governed in two different ways and the outcomes that that would have. And I was so blown. I was like, this is absolute. It got me interested, and then I started reading more and more. Am I correct in finding that out, or is this just my imagination running wild?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is it's more in the Indic storytelling style. There are the style that's there in modern Bollywood, for example, is inspired more by the Persian storytelling style, which some say was inspired by Aristotle's Poetics, where there are philosophies, etc., as a part of it, but may not necessarily be a central part of the story. In the Indic storytelling style, the story is always simply a wrapper for some philosophies that need to be conveyed. And the central question that most of the traditional Indic storytelling style centered around is an answer to this question: what is Dharma? Right? And there is no simple answer, because there's no simple black and white, good and evil, right? It depends on the context, it depends on what needs to be done, and therefore you explore various philosophies in the garb of a story, and you're supposed to draw your own lessons, because remember, in the dharmic way, which is Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, the philosophy is never prescriptive. You're not treated like a child that do this, otherwise you'll burn in hell for eternity. You're not treated like a child. You're treated like an adult, right? That, look, these are the archetypes. These are the possible scenarios. These are the possible strengths and challenges of all archetypes and scenarios. There is no situation which is perfect. Now, this is the context that exists. You think about it and decide what you think is right for you, and go ahead and act. If you think about it, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, Bhagavad Gita is an allegory. Lord Krishna is not just speaking to Arjun, he's speaking to all of us, telling us philosophies on life. When the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna tells Arjun that I've given you knowledge most profound, your task is to think about it and then do what you think is right. Okay. And then live with the consequences, positive or negative, which means you are an adult, right? You are an adult who has to evaluate the circumstances and then make up your own mind. The key challenge in this is that if you are not going to be treated as a child, but as an adult, right? And that you need to have the ability to analyze the situation. How do you learn that ability to analyze the situation? That is through stories, where you see archetypes, you see different ways of life, right?
That is so interesting.
Say you're a person who's a law-abiding person, then the model for you is Lord Ram. And you see Lord Ram's life, see the strengths and the challenges of that way of life, and then decide on your way forward. If you are a person who's driven more by experiencing the rasas of life, okay, then Lord Krishna is your role model. Look at him, see the strengths, see the challenges, and then decide your course of action. Right? So there are different kind of role models and archetypes, and the similar thing applies to societies as well. No society is, it's not that Suryavanshis are better or Chandravanshis are better. There are two different ways of life. Both have their strengths and challenges. You evaluate what you think you are more suited for, then see the strengths and challenges, and then make up your own mind. That's the perspective. Therefore, the stories always become a vehicle to convey some philosophies. They're never stories by themselves.
See, I'm already feeling mind blown. That's a fantastic explanation, because I had so many questions about dharma. I spent some time last semester reading a lot about Mahabharata and Ramayana, and the question that would evade the classic Western way of thinking is, what is the centralized concept of dharma? Where is this key that I look at to understand the code of reality? As if there has to be the 10 commandments, which is classically what their unconscious is made out of. Let's just say, like, a cultural unconscious is made out of. So, and then there is enough instances in both the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are, say, long allegories, where two different types of dharmas come in contest as well. Right? So there is the personal dharma, the social dharma. Dharma is the king, and then dharma as his husband. Ram faces that. And it's not clear how to directly infer from that, at least initially for somebody. I'm like, so do I follow Ram or do I not follow Ram? What is the answer? Like, I read the story. What do I do now? Do I follow Ram, or do I sit back and understand what Ram did? And like, how do I make sense?
That's the opportunity and the challenge of the Indian way. If we step back, what is the fundamental difference between the Western and Middle Eastern way and the Indian way? We Indians like to think we are unique. We are not. We just happen to be the only ones from the ancient cultures who have survived. Every other ancient culture was wiped out. But all ancient cultures had this approach. What is the fundamental difference in the approach? Western, Middle Eastern, and Indian, ancient Chinese, ancient Roman as well, ancient Egyptian,
right,
ancient Greek, Greco-Roman culture. The Western, Middle Eastern thing believes in the concept of one truth. There is one truth. If you don't believe it, you're going to go to hell. Okay, and you better follow that one truth. The ancient Indian way, which is alive till today, and the ancients of all other cultures, was there are multiple truths. There is my truth and there is your truth. We have to find the truth that makes peace with us. Do you notice that in the Western way, even the so-called liberals, I'm not just talking about the religious people who will obviously believe in one God, one truth, but even the so-called liberals will believe that their concept of what are values are the universal values, which everyone better follow. Otherwise, they'll bomb you and bring their democracy and values to you.
Right. Okay. Forced enlightenment.
And which to most of us who are not from that world, it makes no sense. You are killing us to save us. What sense does that make? But they actually believe it. They actually believe that in bombing Iraq, bombing Libya, they are saving them. It's very bizarre. Right? But that is because it comes from the concept of one truth. It's very bizarre to those of us who are open to multiple truths. Right? So what is our way when you're open to multiple truths? So I think one of the best, hymns which truly exemplifies this is this hymn called Nasadiya from Rig Veda. Okay, it's a creation hymn. And most religious scriptures have theories, right, on how creation happened. Bible, Quran, Torah have a common thing that God said, "Let there be light," and creation happened. In this Nasadiya hymn, it's not the only creation hymn in the Rig Veda, by the way. There are many other creation hymns. Okay, it's Purushukta, Hiranyagarbha, many others.
Right.
But the Nasadiya hymn is the one I find most intriguing and inspiring, because the hymn goes with who can know how creation happened. And it says various theories. Maybe this happened. Maybe that happened. The most intriguing part is the stuff at the end. Who can know how creation happened? How can even the gods know how creation happened? Because even they were created after creation happened. How can even the gods know how creation happened? Because even they were created after creation happened. Perhaps the only one who knows how creation happened is the one most high, Adhyaksha. Okay, the one who sees all, Adhyaksha. Okay? Perhaps the only one who knows how creation happened is the one most high, or perhaps even he doesn't know. Okay, now think of the skeptic at the heart of it. Okay.
Right, right.
And this, if you think about it, is a very scientific approach.
Huh.
What is a scientific approach? That boss, unless I can prove something, I am going to be humble and honest enough to say, I don't know.
Right.
Why is I don't know such a liberating thought?
Because then you're
Because
free to
if you
know.
say I don't know, it means you can still keep learning.
Right.
Moment you say I know, this is one truth. And if you don't agree with me, I will kill you or convert you. You stop learning. You stop growing.
Right.
Right. So this is such a it's a very simple concept, but it's such a critical concept in why knowledge, multiple truths, multiplicity of beliefs, innate liberalism is such a core part of the Indian way.
Right.
What is liberalism? Not the Western concept of what is liberalism?
Freedom to be who you are.
Yeah, and I will not force my way on you, but you will not force your way on me. That is liberalism.
Right.
And as long as you're not interfering in my life, I don't care what you do. I mean, I'll try and learn from you.
Right.
Okay. But I'm not going to force my way. I don't think that if you don't agree with me, I have to kill you or convert you. It is just bizarre.
Absolutely.
You find so many Western liberals also have that attitude.
With atheism
If you
too.
don't agree with them, they will bomb you.
Or yes, like with words or with literal bombs, right? You know, it's
or literal bombs. Yeah, at times. I mean, many of them actually believed they were saving Libya. I mean, go and ask Libyans.
Right.
You know, do they feel saved?
Right.
Or
Iraq or Afghanistan or like Syria.
Correct. And
Right.
all of this, the core problem is the belief in the monopoly of one truth. That is where many of these problems arise. If you give up that attachment to one truth, then you have the space for liberalism. That is the Indian way.
There is something super interesting. I remember I was reading something that Wendy Doniger had written, and she was comparing the Ramayana and the Mahabharata in a taking Dharma as an object, and she kept saying that Ramayana, the Kavya, is like a fulfillment of absolute Dharma, while Mahabharata is an attempt to show what violation of the Dharma looks like. Right? She was like trying to draw something of that nature, and I was like, I don't think you truly understand, because I think Dharma is an invitation for the reader to sit in on the story. Because the way we were telling stories was we were acting it out, dancing it out, singing it out, making poetry out of it. It is for the reader to now decide.
Spot on.
Right?
You've understood it.
Right.
See, because her thing that the Ramayana means the fulfillment of Dharma and Mahabharata means the abandonment of Dharma. It again comes down to that basic fallacy that she thinks that someone knows that there is one Dharma, and someone knows it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The problem is that Dharma is complex. Right? So what is, if we learn from Lord Ram, if he's the archetype of the ideal follower of laws, that's what Maryada Purushottam means, the ideal follower of laws.
Right.
And there are many others like him, not just Lord Ram, Gautam Buddha, Mahatma Gandhi. I'd written an article on this in 2013. Even Gautam Buddha was, in a way, an archetype of the ideal follower of laws, as was Mahatma Gandhi, an archetype of the ideal follower of laws. Now, is this the way that everyone has to follow? Lord Ram himself also doesn't make that claim. Okay, because he himself says that there are challenges on this path as well. Right? So if you think of the life of a Maryada Purushottam, someone who's an ideal follower of laws, do you notice that usually such leaders are very good for the societies that they lead? They're fantastic. Right? Like Lord Ram built Ram Rajya.
Right.
Gautam Buddha, till today there are people who find solace from the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths that he propounded. Which is what a way of life, a code that you should follow. Mahatma Gandhi, very good for the societies that they led. Lot of challenges in their personal life. All three, do you notice? All three
of them. All three.
Lot of challenges in their personal life. I'd written that in that article, that if you are the praja of such leaders, if you are the people, the followers of such leaders, you have every right, in fact, every duty to love them because they sacrifice their lives for you. But if you're a family member of such leaders, perhaps you have reason to complain.
Sure.
Right? Now, this again is the complexity of Dharma.
Right.
Right? That, can I as a proud Hindu look up to and worship Lord Ram as a great God, as a great leader? Of course I can.
Right.
But can I at the same time, also realize that what was done to Goddess Sita was unfair?
Right.
Yes. And that doesn't reduce my devotion to Lord Ram. But at the same time, I will realize, yes, what was done to Goddess Sita was unfair. Right? What Mahatma Gandhi did behave with Kasturba ji and his family was unfair. That doesn't reduce my respect for Mahatma Gandhi. Right? And that is the nuance and complexity of Dharma, which anyone who's completely died in this one truth philosophy, as perhaps Wendy Doniger is, that concept, it's very difficult to understand because you have to give up that core concept of there is one truth and I know it. Right. You have to give that up. You have to surrender.
I mean, I hope I was not butchering what Wendy Doniger had tried to written in the previous comment. But about this innate liberalism, which is, I think, part of my fascination with the idea. Like if you begin thinking logically, and I mean logic as in reason, right? You almost automatically by default arrive at that place where you think there is one. But if you only continue to persevere, if you have all that ancient wisdom backing you in your culture, you learn to understand that there is many. And I was speaking to I think Abhijit itself, and Abhijit had mentioned something along the lines of how Rigved was sort of like an agreement of libertarianism, like you do you, we do us, right? Like we live in this. I just think that has two obvious consequences, one of which you've sort of referred to in previous interviews too. One of them, which is infighting. Because as soon as we accept, listen, you and I are different, one day or the other, we'll end up finding a reason to be like, ye guy meri hai, ye guy teri hai, right? Like that's going to happen. Avoid nahi kar sakte. So even the attempt with Suheldev, I see, is to make us realize, oh my God, that ye petty infighting hai. But how do you see this liberal utopia that is coded in this subjective storytelling existing without the infighting? Are these two sides of the same coin?
Yeah, that's a thing that you have to understand when you get on the path of wisdom with the Indian way, that there is no utopia. There is no place which will be perfect for all time to come. There is no kingdom of God where there will be no problems. That does not happen. The only thing that's constant is constant change.
Yes.
Right?
Where is that from?
You have to understand that, which means any way of life, okay, will have its strengths and weaknesses. So yes, I might be questioning the one truth philosophy because I'm at my core a liberal. I'm Indian, so it comes almost naturally to me. You'll find it's not just the followers of the dharmic religions in India, not just the followers of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. Even Indian Muslims and Indian Christians are fundamentally different from how Muslims and Christians behave in many other countries of the world. It is only in India that you will find a Venkateshwara temple, a Hindu Vaishnav temple, where Muslims come and pray. You can Google it, you can find images of Muslim women in burqas coming and praying out there taking prasad. Okay.
Absolutely.
It is only in India where you'll go to Ajmer Sharif and you'll find more Hindus outside of a Friday than Muslims. And the Muslim Khadim out there doesn't get troubled. And he doesn't expect us to convert or become a Muslim. He knows we're Hindu. Many of us, sometimes we go to the Pushkar temple and then come to Ajmer Sharif. So we'll have a tikka on our head. There's no problem. We'll come, we'll pray out there, we'll go. This is the core liberal spirit of multiple truths is almost in our Indian soil, right? But the corollary to this is infighting. Okay, so if you want liberalism, you have to accept infighting. It is the way it is. Okay, you want unity, you have to accept the risk of rigidity and fanaticism. Okay, So one truth cultures, yes, they can be very unified. But the risk is rigidity and fanaticism. Okay. What is the risk that you're willing to take? And why do I think people need to understand this? Because then you know what your strengths and weaknesses are of your culture. Like I, for example, I'm never too worried about Indians not being liberal. I know many op-eds and people in elite circles keep thinking India will not be liberal. As boss, that is not a risk in India. It is certainly not a risk. Okay. The risk in India is internal divisions and decadence. Right. So we have to try and manage that. Followers of the one truth, internal divisions are rarely a problem. Okay. I mean, I'm
You're
quoting the models. I
generalizing,
mean,
but yeah.
it's not completely perfect.
Right.
I mean,
Of course.
there can be some among India who are liberals. There can be some divisions in the one truth way also. But the real risk in the one truth way is rigidity and fanaticism and hatred for the other.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That anyone who is different from you, you have to kill or convert them. Okay. That comes naturally with the one truth way. Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, you notice it. It doesn't even strike us that that if I am speaking to someone about my culture, that he has to convert to my side. It doesn't even enter our mind.
Right.
More often than not, right? But internal divisions are a problem. So that's a point that every way of life has a strength and weakness. Be aware of who you are, so that you can capitalize on your strengths and mitigate your weakness as much as you can. But be aware of who you are. And this is true in the political space as well. So many people, say that we Indians should be like the Chinese. We can't, boss. Okay. Chinese are a compliant kind of one unitary culture. India is a, diverse, rebellious culture. So we have our strengths. They have their strengths. We can't be exactly like them. They cannot be our role model. Our role model can be America, perhaps. But not China. And
Right.
so again, you have to be clear who you are.
Isn't that a natural impediment though? Because I'm not saying I favor this argument, but this is an argument that agar, like you were saying, agar infighting nahi ho rahi hoti, hum log, we can deal with so many pertinent issues. Is this cultural inheritance of liberalism also in a pragmatic way not an obstruction as well? Don't you think?
But every way of life at its roots has the seeds of its own destruction. Every way of life. Right?
That's beautifully said.
One way out of these internal divisions is become a one truth philosophy. Yes, you'll get unity. What is the risk? You'll become rigid and fanatical. And then what happens to rigid fanatical societies? You make enemies of everyone.
Right.
That will also lead to your destruction. Correct. So my point is that if we are aware that this is our core problem, how do we mitigate the divisions as much as we can? And it does not mean that a liberal, diverse society cannot be successful. Look at America. America, why do I say America is a role model? And is it easy to forge unity among Americans? It's damn difficult, man. But that is part of their strength as well, because they are so diverse. They are a hugely innovative society. India at its peak, right, when we were the dominant economic, military, scientific power in the world for most of the first millennium, common era, from 2nd, 3rd century BCE to 11th, 12th century, we were the most influential, by far richest land on earth. Right? So many parts of the world had Indianized themselves. Southeast Asia, China, Japan. They accepted our Central Asia, much of the Middle East. Like today, people Americanize themselves to raise their status.
Right.
Those days, people Indianize themselves to raise their status. Right? So what was our strength? That we were very diverse, hence extremely innovative. But we had a string which united us. When divisions become too extreme, then you have chaos, like sadly is happening in the America of today. Now, I'm an Indian. I'm primarily loyal to India. But I think a powerful America is good for the world. Right? I am very wary of an authoritarian communist superpower. which thinks nothing of putting 1 million people in concentration camps, live organ harvesting, no,
Right. They don't play by rules.
which has, they don't give a damn. I'm afraid of them.
Right.
And I'm not saying America is perfect. Boss, ask the Libyans, ask the Iraqis, for God's sake.
Yes, please. Right. Right.
I mean, and you know, for the elite, you know, Western thinkers and media to say we attacked Libya for their own good. I mean, yeah, go ask the Libyans.
For sure.
Seriously. Okay.
Sure.
I'm not saying they are perfect, but compared to the other guys, boss, they're a lot better. Compared to an authoritarian, communist, very scary country, they're a lot better. Right? And therefore, I wish America would find some way to heal their divisions. Right? I'm sure some middle ground can be found. The differences are not that crazy. And on average, America is not that bad a country. It's a relatively decent country. As superpowers go, again, I'm saying it's not perfect. And there is no perfection anywhere in the world. Among the worst crimes in history have been committed by those who believe in perfection. Right? I'm not saying America is perfect. But in that sense, India has to look at America to see the strengths and to see the challenges.
Right.
The strengths are diverse, innovative, creative, passionate. Exactly who we are. The challenges are crazy divisions, which is sapping their strength and which, for all you know, may take them down. We should be wary of that, of our own divisions. It will never go away completely. Try and mitigate it as much as you can. I wish America does that as well. It'll never go away, all their divisions, but can they mitigate it as best they can? For their own good and frankly for the good of the world.
Right. I'm so sorry I interrupted you twice. I think it is in fact even good to have a relatively small amount of competitive pressure inside the system, like purely from that standpoint, right? When you make each other better and you come out as a collective a lot better.
Which is why such societies are so innovative, right? If it's not we are bottom-up cultures. We are not top-down cultures. Right. China, Japan, in many ways are top-down cultures. We are India, US, we are bottom-up cultures. Bottom-up cultures need that competition, that, you know, it's
tension.
Good. That healthy competition. That tension is good.
Right.
But healthy tension, not beyond a limit.
Right. The second problem with sort of like this innately liberal idea is that because there become so many versions of the stories, and you've discussed this, in fact, it's almost like a nexus of stories where there's some kind of overlap roughly, but what happens is, अब मेरे को सीखना भी है ना अगर, तो मैं कहाँ जाऊं? There is all this wisdom, but it's not accessible, not just because of logistical reasons, which is a whole different thing that people don't write about it, talk about it, or teach it. Also because there is no, if I'm a Christian, I just pick up the Bible. सब है, पढ़ लो, ठीक है, it's pretty literal. यहाँ पे there is so much interpretation, यहाँ पे there is so much variation. It becomes too difficult for somebody to approach their own culture. And I'm being very simplistic about it. What do you think? Like, what do you think about that?
Again, that's a challenge. If there are two ways that people can live life, right? One is they can continue to be children, right? Where someone will decide for them. And there are people who live life that way. They may be 35, 40, their parents or their spouse are making all the decisions for them.
Right.
At times you find that people are so old, their children are making decisions for them. And they live their entire life like that. Now, there is a pleasure in that kind of life. You never have to take any responsibility. And if things go wrong, there's always someone to blame. My parents did this shit. I can blame my spouse. He or she is a moron.
Right.
My children are morons. It's never my fault. My child. I'm just doing what I'm told to do. The other path is you're an adult. You make up your own damn mind. You figure out what it is about life. You don't get a manual when we start life, right? We figure things out.
Right.
How do you learn things on the internet, on the web? You read an interesting article that starts your journey. And then it's kind of like a hypertext that you find something in there which is interesting. You go deeper and out there, and that's your path. Someone else will find a different hypertext, right? That is, it's kind of treating you like an adult, and you discover your own path and live with the consequences of your choices, right? So, in the Indian way, the first standard, the entry level into all our scriptures are two epics. Ramayana, Mahabharata. You start with those two. Unfortunately, most people don't even start that, and the few start that end there, which is not the way it should be. Ramayana and Mahabharata are the entry level, and then you find the hypertext stories which appeal to you. And then go deeper in there. All right. And then you discover your own way. There's not just one Gita, there are many Gitas. There are many rishis. You learn their Upanishads, and many of them are referenced in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Shakuntala's story is there in Abhignana Shakuntalam of Kalidasa, but is there in Mahabharata as well. But it is told in a different way. From there, you can get an insight into another story and then go deeper out there. Okay, so it is in a way a bit like you have to be an adult and you discover the path that is customizable for you. And then you live with the consequences. No one is going to come and make decisions for you.
Right.
Okay. So in the Indian way, you cannot blame God or the gods or goddesses for your lot in life, because there's all decisions are yours. But in the one truth way, it is God's fault. Okay. Like I said, no way is better or worse.
Right.
I know what path I like.
Right.
I want to be an adult. I will make the decisions in my life and I will live with the consequences, positive or negative. I will not blame anyone else.
Right.
But some people don't want that. Some people want a code and they can follow what they are told to do. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging it. You can follow the other path.
Right. Like my concern is only so much. Culture, if looked at in a petri dish, is a competition of ideas, and the ideas that survive become culture that gets passed on. And as the generation that was raised with Bollywood and American culture mating to create, an entire generation of almost anglicized Indians, like Anglo-Indians in a very weird, in the urban centers at least, I feel like these ideas, which I reached out to almost organically for various reasons, one of which being since I was 3, my father would just tell me the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and I was just like very much into that. These ideas get outcompeted. And so my friends and people in my external social circle have a harder time relating to some of the analogies that even I, a mere mortal in this universe, might make, right? And to that effect, it's concerning because ever so often, even with words like Dharma in contemporary discourse, somebody is going to use it in a very personalized fashion. It's a very self-serving Dharma fashion, right? And I don't mean that like interpersonally, ye to mera dharma hai, whatever. And it happens similarly with these stories that are so freely interpretable, so much variation. It almost is as if these stories get outcompeted very easily. And I think that is why somebody like you is super useful, because you do something that appeals to me, people around me, my people who are younger and slightly older than me. Do you think your like, it's a stupid question to ask, but do you think the Immortals of Meluha, the Ramchandra series, has sort of revived our stories in a poppy fashion?
I think that will be it'll be too arrogant of me to even consider that question.
Right.
Who am I to revive it? I'm saying again, we are the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is still alive.
Right.
The only one. Every other pre-Bronze Age culture has been wiped out. Every single one. Right? Most of them violently. Pharaonic Egypt, Mycenae, Mesopotamian, Gilgamesh, Mesopotamian man. Even their descendants don't believe in that culture anymore.
Right.
They are museum pieces. Celtic, I'm in the UK right now. Central America. Their descendants don't believe in that culture anymore. But we still follow rituals and traditions which go back thousands and thousands of years before the end of the Bronze Age. Right? Which go back right to the dawn of civilization. We are really anti-fragile. In many ways. We are the only ones who are still alive. Remember, China is not pre-Bronze Age. China is only 2,500 to 3,000 years old. Pre-Bronze Age means minimum 5,000 years old.
Right.
We are. Right? Have we lost a lot in the last 1,000 years with the invasions? Yes, no doubt. Okay. And I would say we've lost even more in the last 70 years. Okay, since when we become free. for those 1,000 years, okay, we could blame foreigners, the Turks, the French, the British. They destroyed our universities, they destroyed our temples. They won't let us celebrate our festivals. They taxed us for the right to practice our own culture in our own and religion in our own land.
Right.
Yeah, it was a difficult time, but our ancestors fought them. Right? What the hell have we done in the last 70 years when we've been free? Right? The descendants of those Turks from Central Asia, or the descendants of the British Raj, they're not going to come to India and start protesting that how dare you reconnect your education system to your ancient roots.
Right.
Yeah, and Queen Elizabeth isn't going to come and do a protest at Jantar Mantar if we change our education system. So the fault is ours, which means, we have to put that, but we're a democracy, so we have to put that political pressure on our politicians that reconnect our damn colonial education system to our roots. Why is the Ramayana and Mahabharata not taught in our schools? Why was yoga not taught in our schools? Unless it became popular in the US, it won't be taught out. It's good for you, boss. Yoga, pranayam, Ayurveda, they are good for you. Right? Ramayana, Mahabharata, it's a heritage of everyone, not just of the Hindu. It's a heritage of every Indian. Right? These should be taught in our education system, and then this will then help us. Right? In the absence of this, then there are some, who can speak of our stories,
right,
who try and keep it alive. I do it in my own small way.
Right.
There are television series that get made, family elders in every family. Right? So yes, those things are done to keep our culture alive, and we will not die. We are freaking stubborn people.
Yeah.
We will not die.
Very sticky.
Yeah, I mean, if we've suffered a lot worse,
Right.
and we are still here,
Right.
we're not going to die, right? But we're not at our peak, and for that, the key thing that has to happen is education reforms. That's why it's an area I'm so passionate about. We have to reconnect our education system to our roots, and I'm not just talking about religious philosophies and stories. In maths and science and medicine, we teach nothing of our ancestors. In literature, we teach nothing. We are still trying to make Europeans out of Indian students.
Right.
Which is a damn shame.
It is.
I'm
really...
not against Europe or the West. I'm saying again, it's the most successful culture of the last 3 centuries. We must learn from them. But first, let's learn our own stuff.
Right. It's no, you were right. I'm with that. The fact that there has to be some sort of an injection where we wake up to our own heritage, and then we are fine to experiment and explore from there. Right.
Well, one of the things our ancestors believed, Goddess Saraswati can bless anyone. India was like the America of the ancient world. Talented migrants from anywhere could come here. Zoroastrians, Jews. Among the oldest Jewish communities anywhere in the world is in India. They were oppressed all over the world. They were given refuge in India. Zoroastrians, when they were attacked by the Arabs and their fire temples were destroyed, everything, they were given refuge in India. Perhaps the only place where a significantly large community of Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims live in peace is in India.
You're right. You're right.
We were like the America of the ancient world because we were open, welcoming, and we were willing to learn from anyone. Why? Because we believe that Goddess Saraswati can bless anyone, not just an Indian. She can bless an American, she can bless a British guy, she can bless a Chinese, she can bless an Arab, she can even bless a Pakistani. Okay. And if she has blessed someone, it is in our selfish interest to learn from them.
Right.
So we should never be close-minded at all. It is in our selfish interest to learn. But first, we must learn our own stuff. Then learn from others.
मेरे को एक बार बताओ अमीश जी, मैंने ना I think on a couple of podcasts I heard you talk about when stuff comes to your writing, you're like, I am just sort of a medium, I'm just a carrier. और मतलब वो it comes to me, it's sort of a calling, right? It's a very interesting idea. It I'm sure has like great creative, well, automatically the expression becomes divine in some sense to me. Like if I put it poetically, how does one go about finding it? Like, मैं कहाँ सूंघूं? Where do I listen to this beautiful music?
I wish I could explain it, man.
Right.
I genuinely believe it's a bit like the inspirations there in the ether, in Akash, which is the fifth element in the Indian way. And sometimes our antenna just catches it. And you can't plan for it. You just have to prepare yourself as best you can. And then it may come, it may not come, you have to be open to it. And if it comes, write it down, right? Or create whatever you need to create. It wasn't just something that Indians believed, it was something that most ancient cultures believed. So according to the Greeks, for example, the genius was not something that was within you. The genius was essentially a muse, which was outside of you. It was divine.
Right.
And your task as an artist was to help your genius to help you.
Right.
Which means what? You should be open to it. Right. So, for example, if I want to write a book, but I'm busy, on social media trolling someone else, or
Right.
drinking somewhere,
Right.
or watching a movie, then how will I get that blessing? But if I am ready at my best time of day, which for me is the morning, I'm sitting in front of my laptop, I'm waiting for it, the blessing will come. So which means I have to prepare myself. If I'm writing, then I should read as much as I can, because that goes as material in the back of the mind. I know what are the things which work as a key for me. So music works like a key. So I always listen to music. Cream biscuits works as a key. So I eat cream biscuits while writing. But just because I'm doing all that doesn't mean that the blessing will come. Right? But if I'm not doing that, 100% sure the blessing will not come. That's the way it works for me. That's the way it works, I think, for every artist. Prepare yourself and then wait for the blessing.
What is unique is like yours is a very bottom-up approach to life. You're like, okay, I'm going to sit in front of my laptop. Okay, I'm going to play the music I want to play. It's almost as if like, varna, I would imagine, or a naive person would imagine that, acha, mere dimag mein ye idea hai, I'm going to pen this book down. Today I'm going to write this chapter.
But I'll make an Excel sheet, chart, then I'll expand it out and voila, book will be ready.
पूरा फ्लो चार्ट लेके मैंने अपना बुक लिख लिया. But that's not what happens. And it's interesting because I think it leaves room for a very distinct kind of a religious spiritual instinct. Like
it is. And the problem these days is again, it's a result of the education system and the one truth philosophy, because science emerged as a in the West, emerged as a rebellion against the church.
Right.
So it is believed that you can either be rational or intuitive. You can't be both.
Right.
You can either be scientific or religious. You can't be both, which is not the ancient Indian way. Our greatest scientists were also deeply religious people. Till today, ISRO scientists, before the satellite gets launched, will take parts of it and do a Vishwakarma puja. Go to a temple, and they don't find anything bizarre about it. It's obvious.
Right.
You need the blessings of the divine. That doesn't mean I will not do hard work. I will do hard work. But I'll get the blessings of the divine. It's the marriage between the left and the right brain, between the rational and the intuitive. That's what leads to the best creativity. And for that, one of the problems with the modern Western education system, which sadly we've adopted into India and many parts of the world, is like an approach of almost looking down on the right brain, on the intuitive brain. And reason is everything. Rationalism is everything. I'm not deriding reason.
Right.
But there is a beauty to intuitiveness, to spirituality, to a connection to the divine. And if you can find a marriage between both, which is what our ancient Gurukul system used to do, then you can create magic.
It's like saying, I don't deride reason, I understand its limits. Right? Like there is a certain point at which the buck stops, and you have to then incorporate other elements to make sense. And
if you can find marriage between the two, then that is when magic starts. Right? But for that, the first step is you have to train your intuitive mind, be able to receive those blessings. Meditation, spirituality, art, music, those things essentially train the intuitive part of the brain.
I have only a couple of more questions because I should definitely let you go at some point. This is my 14-year self, somebody who read the Immortals of Meluha for the first time. What I understood now when I put it in picture is like you and I'm using very simplistic words. Please do not mind that, but it's like you took people, characters, gods, figures from our mythology, sort of historicized them in a fictional way to make it more relatable, right? I wonder if that scale could be jacked to the point where I'm reading a book by you where one of these figures is placed in 1500s, 1600s, maybe even the 2000s. Like, how modern is that like a thing that you consider for your books? I just wonder if that'd be a good combination.
Nothing like that has struck me as yet, but if someone does it, I say, why not?
Right.
Because I think one of the reasons our culture has remained alive for so long is we have this beautiful marriage of religiosity and liberalism. Okay. What does that do? It gives us a balance of rigidity and flexibility. Okay. To use Nassim Nicholas Taleb's term, it makes us anti-fragile.
Right. Beautiful book.
Because extremism of any kind is not good. Right. As comes down from our ancestors, Ati Sarvatra Varjayit. Extremism of any kind should be avoided. What happens when you're too rigid? Okay. When the winds of change come, as is a given, right? Change is the only constant. If you're too rigid, you'll not survive. It's like when a hurricane comes, the trees which are most rigid are the ones which fall first. Trees which are slightly flexible will sway, let the wind go, and then come back. Right? So if you're too rigid, you'll fall. But if you're too flexible, if you're like Kusha grass, anyone can trample over you, then your existence has no purpose. Right? If you're not rigid and tough enough to stand up to the force of change, then also you can get rolled over. It happened to many parts of the world when the Turks and the Europeans attacked, especially during the colonial invasion. So much North America, Australia, they were all wiped out. Right? So you need an ideal mix of rigidity and flexibility, which is what we have. Right? How does that rigidity and flexibility come? When we have stories which are linked to the ancient way, but we are willing to look at it in a new way as well. We're willing to add something new. That adds flexibility to it. If you think about it, why did the Greco-Roman culture of the Olympian gods, why did they die out? Right?
They did not update themselves.
When Christianity came to the Greeks, the first Gentiles to convert mass outside of the Israelites to Christianity were the Greeks. Correct? And the Greeks, remember, in those days were the intellectual elite of the Greco-Roman world. They were looked up to.
Right.
Now the culture changed, Greek culture was changing, and the stories of their Olympian gods, which to them used to appear, that they are so passionate and willful, those same stories started appearing like their gods are debauched and decadent. When this happened, the stories of their gods didn't change. Therefore, their gods died out. Whereas in India, when times changed, the stories of our gods adapted. Right? The soul was the old, but the stories adapted. What did Tulsidas ji do in the 16th century? He adapted the ancient story of the Ramayana to the idiom of the 16th century, gave it life once again. Right? So the soul is the old, but you add in something of the new. Ideal mix of rigidity and flexibility. So I think that this is not, there are some who think this is a weakness of India, of our culture, that, boss, what is the original thing? What is the thing that cannot be changed? Our strength is that we can keep the soul of the old, but add in something of the new again and again and again and again. That keeps it alive.
Immortal.
An ideal mix of rigidity and flexibility.
That's beautifully put. You were so good with words. It's great. I'm having such a good time. Finally, do you have any new books? Are you writing the fourth one for the Ramchandra series? What is in the?
Yes, box? I had a book that was launched recently, which was Legend of Suheldev.
Oh, of course, yes. I went through it. My mother is finishing reading it right now as well.
Awesome.
Right. So
I hope you liked it.
Oh, of course, yes.
That's from the Writer Center. And right now, I'm writing the 4th book of the Ramchandra series. So that is also on the agenda.
All right.
A lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Amishji. This has been absolutely fantastic. This is everything and more that I was looking forward to. Thank you so much. I'm very satisfied.